Snow had buried the road when 3 faint knocks reached Rhett Calder's lonely cabin. Outside stood an old homeless man holding a freezing German Shepherd puppy beneath a worn blanket. He asked for no food, no money, and no place by the fire. He only said the puppy belonged at Rhett's door because of a promise made to Rhett's late wife. By morning, the old man was gone, and the small metal tag around the puppy's neck led back to people the town had quietly forgotten. What began with one fragile dog would force Rhett to decide whether kindness means saving others or protecting their right to choose. Stay to the end. Tell us where you're watching from, and please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers and keep these stories alive. Winter made Larkspur Basin look kinder from a distance. Snow rested in smooth white layers over the cedar roofs, softened the iron railings along Main Street, and turned the frozen lake below the town into a pale mirror beneath the Wyoming sky. At dusk, the windows of the bakery and hardware store glowed amber against the blue cold. Chimney smoke rose in thin, orderly columns, and the pine-covered ridges appeared almost gentle under their burden of white. But beyond the last street lamp, winter stopped pretending to be beautiful. Broken Fir Road wound north through dense timber, climbing toward a part of the valley where the wind could erase tire tracks in minutes. There were no shops there, no passing plows after dark, no nearby neighbors likely to notice a light going out. Rhett Calder preferred it that way. At 56, he had the broad shoulders and controlled movements of a man whose body remembered demanding work even after his life had grown quiet. His brown-gray hair had reached the collar of his olive combat shirt, untidy from being pushed back with one hand. A faded camouflage pattern covered the sleeves, and the black ink of an old Navy trident showed along his right forearm whenever the fabric pulled upward. Once, Rhett had been a Navy rescue diver. Later, he had built and repaired wooden boats in a workshop behind the house. Both occupations had required patience, strong hands, and the belief that damaged things could still be brought back. He no longer believed that about everything. The workshop had remained closed since Elspeth died 4 winters earlier. Dust covered the clamps. Wood shavings still rested beneath one bench as though someone might return after lunch to sweep them. Rhett had locked the doors the morning after the funeral and never carried another plank inside. His days had narrowed since then. He cut firewood, repaired what broke, bought groceries in quantities designed to avoid unnecessary trips into town. He had perfected the art of leaving a store before anyone could ask a second question. "How are you holding up? Keeping busy? You should come by sometime." People meant well. That was the trouble. Kindness required an answer, and Rhett had none that did not feel like either a lie or an invitation. That night, the storm reached the house shortly after 9. Wind dragged snow across the roof and pressed against the windows with long, low groans. Rhett sat near the stone fireplace, repairing the leather strap of an old diving watch. The watch had not been underwater in years, yet he maintained it as carefully as though an emergency call might come before morning. The radio warned that visibility had fallen below 50 yards along the upper roads. Rhett switched it off. The silence afterward was almost complete. Then came 3 knocks. They were so weak that Rhett first mistook them for ice falling from the eaves. He waited. Nothing. Rhett returned to the watch strap. 3 more knocks came, slower this time, not a branch, not loose siding. Someone was outside. Rhett stood, pulled on his dark green parka, and crossed the room. His hand paused on the door latch. Broken Fir Road was difficult to find in good weather. No sensible person would be walking it tonight. He opened the door only a few inches. Snow rushed through the gap. An old man stood beneath the porch light. He was thin enough that the wind seemed capable of folding him in half. Frost clung to his uneven white beard and to the hair escaping from beneath a faded navy cap. His gray-brown wool coat was too light for the cold, one brass button missing near the middle. Strips of cloth had been tied around his worn boots, already stiff with ice. In his arms, wrapped almost completely inside an old military blanket, was something small and trembling. The blanket moved. A narrow black and gold muzzle appeared, followed by two dark amber eyes. A German shepherd puppy. "What happened?" Rhett asked. The old man studied him with surprising alertness. His face was exhausted, but his eyes were not confused. "Rhett Calder?" "Who's asking?" "Whitaker Sloan." The name meant nothing to Rhett. Whitaker adjusted the bundle against his chest. The puppy made a faint sound, not quite a whine. More like breath-catching, where strength had nearly run out. "You need to come inside," Rhett said. Whitaker shook his head. "You need a hospital." "Probably." That wasn't a suggestion. "I know." "You always sound like that?" Rhett stared at him. A flicker of dry amusement crossed Whitaker's weathered face. "Good," the old man murmured. "She said you'd still be difficult." The wind struck the porch hard enough to make the hanging lamp sway. Rhett opened the door wider. "Who said?" Whitaker lifted the puppy toward him. "This boy is for you." "No." The answer came before Rhett had fully considered it. Whitaker did not appear surprised. "I'm not taking a dog." "He isn't luggage." "I don't care what he is. Bring him inside until the road clears. Then we'll call someone." "I didn't come here for shelter." "Then you made a poor choice of weather." Whitaker coughed into his shoulder. The sound was deep and dry, and when it passed, he needed a moment before breathing normally again. Still, he held the puppy carefully. "I promised to bring him to this door," Whitaker said. "Not another house. Not a rescue office. This one." Rhett's patience thinned. "Promised who?" Whitaker looked at him for a long moment. "Elspeth Calder." The name entered the doorway more sharply than the wind. Rhett did not move. The puppy's head slipped against the blanket, too tired to hold itself upright. A narrow strip of golden fur ran down the center of its forehead. One ear had begun to rise, the other folded weakly sideways. Whitaker extended the dog again. This time, Rhett noticed the cord around its neck. A dull metal tag hung from it. He reached for the tag without taking the puppy. Snow melted against the metal beneath his thumb. On one side, worn but readable, were the words, E. Calder. Rhett turned it over. Winter Kitchen. Route 4. For a moment, the porch disappeared. He saw Elspeth in a burgundy coat, standing at their kitchen table with boxes of canned soup stacked around her. Her hair had been tied back with a strip of purple cloth. She had complained that the metal tag was ugly, and then worn it every Saturday for 6 winters. Winter Kitchen had been the volunteer program she joined before her illness. Rhett had driven her into town on mornings when the roads were bad. She had always returned smelling of broth, cold air, and the clove soap used at the church. The tag had vanished after her death. Rhett had assumed it was lost with the rest of the small things that disappeared when a life was packed into boxes by people too tired to understand what mattered. "Where did you get this?" he asked. Whitaker's shoulders lowered slightly, as though reaching the right door had allowed age to return to him. "She left it with me." "That doesn't answer the question." "No, it answers the important part." The puppy shivered again. Rhett finally took him. The little body weighed almost nothing. Cold had worked through the blanket and into the dog's bones. Rhett could feel the rapid heartbeat against his forearm, frail and frantic. The puppy's front paws were too large for the rest of him, but there was no strength in them. One paw settled against the faded trident tattoo on Rhett's arm. Rhett stepped back from the door. "Both of you, inside." Whitaker entered only as far as the mudroom. Warm air touched his face. He closed his eyes briefly, but refused the chair Rhett pulled forward. Rhett placed the puppy in a wooden crate lined with towels near the fireplace. He heated water, mixed a little honey into a mug for Whitaker, then filled a shallow bowl for the dog. The puppy tried to stand. Its back legs failed. Rhett caught it before its chin struck the floor. Something tightened low in his chest. Not affection, he told himself. Assessment. Responsibility. The old habits of rescue. Find the immediate danger. Stabilize. Prevent further loss. Those habits were safer than feeling. Whitaker drank slowly, holding the mug in both hands. "What happened to him?" Rhett asked. "Long ride. Not enough food. Too much cold." "Where from?" "A place outside town." "What place?" Whitaker looked toward the window. "I have to go back." "No. There's something I left." "It can stay left until morning." "Not that long." Rhett stood between him and the door. "You can barely breathe." "I've breathed badly before." "You won't make the road." "I don't need the road." That answer made Rhett look at him more carefully. Whitaker reached into his coat and checked an inner pocket. Whatever he expected to find, there was missing. His expression changed, not panic exactly, but recognition of a mistake. "The rest is nearby," he said. "I hid it before coming up." "The rest of what?" Whitaker set the empty mug down. "Questions you haven't asked yet." Rhett almost laughed, but there was nothing humorous in the old man's face. "You appear at my door in a blizzard with a dying puppy and my wife's tag. You don't get to speak in riddles." "The pup isn't dying." "You don't know that." "I know he made it here." "That isn't the same thing." "No," Whitaker said, "but sometimes arriving is the first medical procedure." Rhett glanced toward the crate. The puppy had dragged itself to the edge of the towels. Its amber eyes remained fixed on Rhett. Not on Whitaker, not on the fire. On him. Whitaker noticed. "There," the old man said softly. "That's why." Rhett turned back. "Why what?" "Why she chose your door." Before Rhett could answer, Whitaker opened the outer door. Wind filled the mudroom with snow. Rhett caught his sleeve. "You're staying?" Whitaker looked down at Rhett's hand, then up at his face. "You still opened the door," he said. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means she wasn't entirely wrong about you." Whitaker pulled free, not with strength, but with a dignity that made force feel indecent. "I'll come back before daylight." "You won't?" "Then you'll know where to start looking." He stepped into the storm. Rhett followed as far as the porch steps. The beam from the outside lamp caught Whitaker for several yards, the bent back, the thin coat, the boots wrapped in cloth. Then the snow took him. Rhett stood beneath the porch roof, listening. No engine started. No second voice called. There was only wind moving through the pines. Behind him, the puppy cried once. Rhett turned. The dog had tried to climb from the crate and become tangled in the blanket. Rhett went inside, closed the door, and freed him. For the rest of the night, he sat on the floor beside the fire. He fed the puppy warm liquid from a spoon, a little at a time. He rubbed its paws between his palms and listened as the breathing gradually became less shallow. Near dawn, the dog finally slept with its nose pressed against Rhett's wrist. Rhett did not sleep at all. When daylight came, the storm had weakened, but not ended. He wrapped the puppy in fresh towels, placed the crate near the stove, and went outside. Whitaker's tracks led from the porch toward the trees. Rhett followed them past the woodpile and down the narrow trail beside the road. The prints were uneven, one foot dragging more than the other. After a quarter mile, drifting snow began filling them. Near the turn toward an old maintenance shack, Rhett found a brass button lying in a shallow hollow. It matched the remaining buttons on Whitaker's coat. Beyond that point, the tracks vanished. Rhett searched the shack, the ditch, and the lower tree line. He called Whitaker's name until his voice disappeared into the wind. Nothing answered. By 8, a county snowplow came grinding along Broken Fir Road. The driver stopped when he saw Rhett standing near the shoulder. The man who climbed down was broad and heavy-set, with a weather-reddened face and a short gray beard. His orange reflective coat looked nearly luminous against the snow. A dented blue thermos rested in one gloved hand. "Calder?" he called. "Something wrong?" Rhett showed him the button and described Whitaker. The driver's expression shifted. "Thin old fellow? Navy cap? Carried a blanket like it held the crown jewels? You saw him? Gave him a ride last night." The man introduced himself as Dale Mercer. "Picked him up near the lower service road. He asked to get off at Broken Fir." "In that storm?" "I told him it was foolish. He said foolish and necessary weren't opposites." "Was he alone?" Dale nodded. "Except for whatever was inside that blanket." Rhett looked toward his house. From here it was barely visible through the snow-covered trees. "Did he say where he was going afterward?" "No, only that he had one delivery left." Dale helped search for another hour. They found no further tracks, no body, no dropped bag, only snow rising steadily along the ditch. By late morning, Rhett had to make another decision. The puppy was warmer but still weak. It needed more than improvised milk and towels. He drove into town with the crate secured on the passenger seat. Dr. Lenora Vance's veterinary clinic stood near the eastern edge of Larkspur Basin, a low brick building with steam fogging the front windows. Lenora was 58, lean and sharp-featured, with red-brown hair cut to her chin and pale green eyes that missed very little. She did not waste time asking Rhett why a man who lived alone had arrived with a puppy. She sat on the floor before touching the dog, let him smell her fingers, then examined him with calm, practiced hands. "Dehydrated," she said. "Underfed, mild exposure, no frostbite." "He'll live?" "If he's kept warm and fed properly, probably." "Probably?" Lenora looked over her glasses. "He's 8 weeks old, not a diesel engine. I'm not giving you a warranty." Despite himself, Rhett almost smiled. Lenora studied the golden stripe on the puppy's forehead, then turned the old tag in her fingers. "Where did you get him?" "Whitaker Sloan brought him." Her hand stopped. "You know Whitaker?" "I know of him." "And the dog?" Lenora examined the uneven black saddle across the puppy's back. "This line began with a shepherd named Clover. Elspeth brought her to me 11 years ago after finding her half-starved behind a seasonal campground." Rhett remembered Clover vaguely. Long ears, suspicious eyes, Elspeth sitting on their kitchen floor for an hour because the dog would not approach anyone standing. "Clover had a daughter," Lenora continued. "That daughter produced one final litter at a small rescue north of here. This pup was the weakest. The rescue is closing after the property sale. The other puppies were placed." "And this one?" No one wanted the sickly male with the folding ear. The puppy looked up as though insulted. Lenora's mouth softened. "Whitaker collected him 3 days ago." "Why?" "You'll have to ask Whitaker." "I'm trying." She gave Rhett feeding instructions, medication, and a padded bed. "What do I call him?" Lenora asked while writing the clinic record. "I'm not keeping him." "Temporary animals still require names." Rhett looked through the window. Outside the clinic, snow had gathered along a wire fence. In another season, purple clematis might have climbed something like it. "Clem," he said. Lenora wrote it down without comment. That evening, Rhett placed the padded bed beside the fireplace. Clem slept there for less than 10 minutes. Then the puppy climbed out, crossed the wooden floor with clumsy determination, and reached Rhett's boots near the chair. He turned twice, collapsed against the worn leather, and laid one oversized paw across Rhett's toe. Rhett looked down at him. The house remained quiet. The workshop remained closed. Elspeth remained gone. Nothing had been restored, yet near Rhett's feet a small chest rose and fell beneath yellow and black fur. For the first time in 4 years, there was breathing in the house that did not belong to memory. Clem objected to the truck before Rhett had even started the engine. The puppy sat on the passenger side floor in a padded carrier Dr. Lenora Vance had loaned them, staring up through the opening with the solemn offense of someone who had been promised warmth and was now being transported into machinery. "You survived a blizzard," Rhett said. "You can survive 12 miles of bad suspension." Clem pressed his nose against the mesh and made a quiet, doubtful sound. The storm had moved east during the night, leaving Larkspur Basin under a sky so clear that the cold looked visible. Sunlight struck the snowbanks along Broken Fir Road and broke into hard white glare. Every branch glittered. Every roof carried a clean ridge of snow. Rhett kept one hand on the wheel and the other near the carrier whenever the truck hit a rut. He had already called the sheriff's office and the county hospital that morning. No one matching Whitaker Sloane's description had been admitted. No body had been found along the plowed roads. The dispatcher had taken the information politely, but without urgency. An elderly man with no fixed address could move through a town without creating an absence anyone recognized. That thought followed Rhett down the mountain. The old stone church stood 2 blocks from Main Street, its bell tower rising above the snow-covered cottonwoods. Its front doors were propped open, despite the cold. Warm air drifted out, carrying the smell of onions, coffee, and bread. A painted wooden sign beside the steps read, "Winter Kitchen, Hot Meals, Warm Clothing." No questions at the door. Rhett had seen the sign before. He had driven past it often enough to know when its wording changed. He had never gone inside. Clem had to be carried. His legs were stronger than the day before, but Lenora had warned Rhett against letting him spend too much energy proving it. The church basement was crowded without feeling chaotic. Folding tables ran beneath strings of warm bulbs. Volunteers filled paper containers with stew while 2 old commercial ovens worked against the cold. Coats hung from a pipe rack near the wall, organized by size rather than gender. At the far end of the room, a woman in a mustard-colored sweater was showing a volunteer how to stretch 12 portions of soup into 16 without making anyone feel cheated. She looked up before Rhett spoke. Reverend Laurel Finch was 53, full-bodied and steady on her feet, with warm brown skin and black hair threaded with silver, gathered loosely at the back with a wooden pin. Round brass-framed glasses hung from a cord at her chest. Her expression did not brighten with false cheer when she recognized him. That made Rhett trust her slightly more. "Rhett Calder," she said. "You remember me?" "I remember everyone who stands outside after memorial services and leaves before the coffee is poured." He glanced toward the kitchen. "Is that part of the pastoral record?" "No, that part is personal irritation." Her attention dropped to Clem. The puppy had pushed his head above the blanket and was watching the room with one ear upright and the other folded sideways. Laurel's face changed, not into delight, into recognition. "Where did you get that tag?" Rhett looked down. The metal disc rested against Clem's yellow chest. "A man named Whitaker Sloane brought him to my house last night." Laurel removed her glasses. "Whitaker came to Broken Fir?" "You know him." "I know he doesn't climb that road in winter unless desperation has taken over his judgment." "He said Elspeth sent him." A nearby volunteer dropped a spoon into a metal tray. The sound rang through the room, but Laurel did not look away from Rhett. She reached toward the tag, stopping before touching it. "Elspeth wore this on Route 4, she said. She complained that the clasp snagged every sweater she owned." "That sounds like her." "She also refused to replace it because replacement tags cost $6, and $6 bought 12 cups of soup." "That also sounds like her." Laurel finally touched the edge of the metal. Whitaker kept it? Apparently. And gave you the dog? He left the dog, then disappeared. Laurel's hand withdrew. How long ago? About 10 hours. Have you reported him? I called. That wasn't my question. Rhett felt the old resistance rise. He had contacted the proper people. He had searched the road. He had taken the puppy to a veterinarian. Those were actions. Actions were measurable. Laurel was asking whether he had allowed Whitaker to become his concern. I gave his description, Rhett said. Laurel studied him for another moment, then turned toward the kitchen. Mara, take the soup. Devon, if you add more salt, our guests will preserve through spring. A young volunteer surrendered the salt shaker. Laurel motioned Rhett toward a small table near the pantry. Clem stayed in Rhett's arms. Whitaker used to work for the county transportation office, Laurel said. Not as a driver, logistics, snow routes, medical transfers, emergency motel vouchers. He could look at 6 roads and tell you which one would close first by the way the wind sounded in the culverts. What happened to him? The simple answer or the honest one? Honest? He trusted the wrong relative with his name. Whitaker had guaranteed a business loan for a nephew who wanted to purchase 2 shuttle vans. The business failed. The nephew left Wyoming. Whitaker's savings, vehicle, and small house went with the debt. He could have asked for help sooner, Laurel said, which is a sentence people enjoy saying when they have never needed to ask. Rhett shifted Clem's weight. And after that? He lived in his car until the transmission failed. Then laundromats, shelters, church floors when he allowed us to catch him. He worked with Elspeth? They worked against each other beautifully. Rhett raised an eyebrow. Elspeth believed every problem improved with food. Whitaker believed every problem improved with a map and 3 copies of the correct form. They argued constantly. A brief smile crossed Laurel's face. Together they were usually right. Years earlier, Whitaker had helped design a county program intended to move older homeless residents from temporary winter beds into stable housing or assisted living. Elspeth had supported the outreach side, visiting people who avoided formal services. What was the program called? Rhett asked. It changed names every time someone applied for new funding. Whitaker called it The Bridge. And did it work? For some people. Laurel's answer came too carefully. Before Rhett could press, Clem twisted in his arms. The puppy's nose lifted. His body became alert in a way Rhett had not yet seen. He sniffed toward a row of folded blankets stacked beside the pantry. Rhett lowered him to the floor but kept 2 fingers through the loop of his soft temporary collar. Clem moved unsteadily across the tile. He ignored the volunteers, the food, and a dropped piece of bread. At the blanket pile, he pushed his muzzle between 2 folded layers of gray wool and inhaled deeply. Then he began pawing. Easy, Rhett said. Clem persisted, whining under his breath. Laurel crouched beside him. That blanket came from Bright Haven. Rhett looked at her. The shelter? Winter Services Center, Laurel corrected, though her tone suggested she did not care for the distinction. They donate surplus blankets when they replace inventory. Clem caught a corner in his teeth and dragged it loose. The scent reached Rhett then, smoke, antiseptic, and a sharp herbal odor resembling muscle rub. Whitaker's old military blanket had carried the same mixture. Whitaker stayed there? Rhett asked. Until 3 weeks ago. What happened? Laurel stood slowly. Bright Haven says he was removed for disruptive behavior and theft of internal documents. You believe that? I believe Whitaker could be disruptive. He considered politeness an optional attachment. And the theft? I believe he took papers. That isn't the same answer. No? Laurel folded the gray blanket again, but not as neatly as before. He claimed people were being moved out too quickly. He said the records didn't match the beds. Then he began asking questions in front of donors. What kind of people? older residents, mostly those with medical needs, no family nearby, or animals they wouldn't surrender. Clem sat down beside the blankets, suddenly tired from his small investigation. Rhett lifted him before his front legs could slide apart. The puppy rested his chin against Rhett's forearm. Laurel watched the movement. Elspeth would have enjoyed that. He's cold. Of course. Rhett disliked the faint patience in her voice. Laurel led him to an old storage room behind the kitchen. Shelves held canned goods, winter boots, folding cots, and cardboard boxes marked with years. Dust softened everything that had not been needed recently. She reached for a box labeled Route 4. Inside were volunteer schedules, old meal tickets, handwritten maps, and photographs held together with rubber bands. Laurel found one near the bottom. Elspeth stood beside a white delivery van, wearing her burgundy coat and green canvas apron. Her chestnut hair was tied back with a strip of purple cloth. Whitaker stood beside her, thinner but upright, pointing toward the camera as though correcting the photographer's route. 6 older adults gathered around them, holding soup cups. One woman had a small terrier tucked inside her coat. Rhett looked longer than he intended. Elspeth had not been posing properly. Her eyes were turned toward someone outside the frame, and her smile had arrived before the camera was ready. That was how Rhett remembered her best, not centered, never still, always noticing something that needed doing beyond the place where she had been asked to stand. Laurel turned the photograph over. A sentence was written across the back in Elspeth's slanted handwriting. Rhett understands responsibility before he understands hope. The words made him angry, not because they were cruel, because they knew him too well and had survived long enough to prove it. "She wrote this when?" he asked. "I don't know." "You kept it here?" "It belonged to the program. It has my name on it." "So does the tag." Apparently, Elspeth had an optimistic attitude toward future delivery. Rhett set the photograph on the box. "She planned this?" "No." Laurel's answer came firmly enough to stop him. "Elspeth did not plan for you to receive one particular dog 4 years after her death. She was compassionate, Rhett, not prophetic." He looked at her. She knew Clover's line might continue. She knew Whitaker would remain involved with the rescue if he could. She hoped that someday an animal might need a home at the same moment you needed a reason not to close another door. "That sounds like planning." "It sounds like hope. Hope is usually less organized." Clem stirred against his arm and placed one paw over the faded ink of Rhett's tattoo. Laurel replaced the box lid. "Brighthaven may know where Whitaker went." "Then I'll ask." "I'm coming." "I didn't invite you." "You don't know Barton Kells." "I know men who avoid answering questions." Laurel lifted her coat from a hook. "That confidence is exactly why I'm coming." Brighthaven stood on the northern edge of town beside a medical office complex. The building was newer than the church and designed to photograph well. Pale stone, broad windows, a covered entry, and a carved wooden sign depicting 2 hands around a lantern. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish. Framed photographs lined the lobby walls. Volunteers serving meals. Donors holding oversized checks. Barton Kells standing beside officials beneath banners bearing words such as dignity, transition, and renewal. Barton appeared before the receptionist finished calling him. At 61, he had silver hair combed carefully to one side and a smooth, well-rested face. His camel-colored coat fit perfectly across the shoulders. Tortoiseshell glasses rested low enough on his nose to suggest constant, thoughtful attention. "Laurel," he said warmly, "and Mr. Calder. I'm sorry we're meeting under difficult circumstances." "You know who I am," Rhett said. "Larkspur Basin is not large, and your wife did considerable good here." The use of Elspeth's memory felt practiced. Rhett held Clem closer. "I'm looking for Whitaker Sloan." Barton's expression adopted regret. Whitaker chose to leave our program. In a blizzard? 3 weeks ago, not last night. Why? He became increasingly agitated. He accused staff of misconduct, entered restricted offices, and removed documents containing private information. Did you report the theft? We chose compassion over prosecution. Laurel's mouth tightened. That sounds excellent on a brochure, she said. Barton did not react. He was offered behavioral support, he continued. He declined. Rhett looked past him into the main sleeping area. Rows of made beds stood beneath soft ceiling lights. Several were occupied. Many were empty. You're full? Rhett asked. Our emergency capacity is currently committed. There are empty beds. Some are reserved for medical transition. Others are required to remain available for county emergency placement. Funding categories are unfortunately less flexible than human need. The answer was calm, detailed, and plausible. That was what made Rhett dislike it. Did Whitaker ask about people being transferred out? He said. Barton adjusted one cuff. Whitaker often misunderstood placement procedures. Where were they sent? I cannot discuss private cases. Did he leave an address? No. Did anyone from here see him afterward? Not that I'm aware of. Clem shifted and looked toward a side hallway. A staff member passed carrying a stack of gray blankets identical to the one at the church. Rhett felt the puppy tense, but he did not follow the reaction. A scent was not proof, and Clem was not a compass. Barton noticed the tag. For the first time, something interrupted the smoothness of his face. Only for a second. Elspeth's route marker, he said. You recognize it? Many people here do. Did Whitaker show it to you? No. The reply came too quickly. Then Barton smiled again. I hope you find him safe, Mr. Calder. Truly. But Whitaker has a history of disappearing when people attempt to help him. Rhett looked at the photographs on the walls. Every image showed assistance moving in one direction, from the clean, smiling giver toward the grateful recipient. No one in the photographs appeared to be deciding anything. Outside, Laurel waited until they reached the truck. He lied about the tag, Rhett said. Possibly. You saw it. I saw him recognize it. That proves recognition. You always this cautious? When the truth concerns people who can lose shelter because I enjoy making accusations? Yes. They drove to the old bus depot at the western edge of town. Only one covered bench remained in use. Beneath it sat a small woman in a plum-colored coat, her back straight despite the cold. Her silver hair was cropped close to her neck. A wooden cane with a carved bird's head handle rested across her knees. Laurel introduced her as Inez Caro. Inez looked at Rhett, then at Clem. So, she said, Whitaker finally delivered the dog. Rhett stopped. You knew? I knew he had made a promise. Whitaker collected promises the way other men collect parking tickets. She shifted, making room on the bench but not inviting pity. Inez had lived at Bright Haven the previous winter. She described forms presented late in the evening, conversations held when residents were exhausted, and choices that became smaller each time they were explained. No one said they would throw me into the snow, she said. They said my bed could not be guaranteed after Tuesday. They said the place outside the county had more appropriate services. They said my cat complicated placement. What happened to the cat? Rhett asked. Whitaker found us a church basement that took both of us. Her fingers tightened around the cane. He asked why transfers always increased before inspection weeks. Asked why the sickest residents disappeared from the common room before donor photographs. Barton said Whitaker was confused. Was he? Whitaker was many things. Confused was rarely one of them. Snow slid from the depot roof in a soft collapse. Inez studied Clem's uneven ears. "People think coercion has to shout," she said. "Usually it speaks gently and tells you there is only one bed left." Rhett looked back toward town. Bright Haven's upper windows caught the afternoon sun. From this distance, the building appeared warm. He thought of Whitaker carrying a weak puppy up broken fir road with no proper coat, of the missing button, of Barton recognizing Elspeth's tag and denying it a breath later. Rhett took out his phone. This time he did not call the General County line. He called the sheriff's office and asked to file a formal missing person report for Whitaker Sloan, 74, medically vulnerable, last seen walking into a blizzard after indicating that he possessed information someone might want hidden. When the dispatcher asked his relationship to Whitaker, Rhett looked at Clem. "None," he said at first, then he corrected himself. "He came to my door." It was not a category on the form, but it was enough to make Rhett stay on the line. Deputy Graham Sutter did not look like a man easily persuaded by atmosphere. He sat behind a scarred desk at the county sheriff's office, reading Rhett's written statement for the second time while snowmelt darkened the shoulders of his brown patrol coat. At 49, Graham had a solid, heavy build, a square face softened by full cheeks, and a short, blonde-gray mustache that made him appear less severe than his questions did. A silver fountain pen rested between his fingers. It had not moved for nearly a minute. "So Whitaker brought you the dog," Graham said at last, "mentioned your wife, refused shelter, and left on foot." "Yes." "You found one button." "Yes." "Dale Mercer confirms giving him a ride to Broken Fir." "He does." "And Barton Kells says Whitaker voluntarily left Bright Haven 3 weeks ago." Rhett leaned back in the chair. Clem slept inside a carrier near his boots, wrapped in a fleece blanket Lenora had provided. The puppy had spent the first 5 minutes attempting to chew the zipper, then surrendered to sleep with one oversized paw pressed against the mesh. "Barton said a number of things," Rhett replied. Graham capped the pen. "I know you don't like him." "I met him once." "You disliked him efficiently." "That doesn't make him honest." "It doesn't make him guilty either." Rhett's jaw tightened. Graham noticed but did not react. He had worked with Rhett during 2 winter rescues over the years, once when a pair of tourists drove through a closed barrier and buried their vehicle in a drift, and once when a fisherman fell through early lake ice. Graham knew Rhett was good when danger had a shape. This danger did not. "Bright Haven is licensed," Graham continued. "Its last county inspection found minor administrative issues and no immediate safety violations. It has contracts with 2 medical providers and years of community support. Empty beds while they turn people away. Beds divided under different funding categories. You heard the explanation." "I heard an explanation." "And you have no evidence it was false." Rhett looked down at Clem. The puppy's breathing fogged a small circle on the carrier's mesh. "I have a 74-year-old man missing after a blizzard." "That," Graham said, "is what I can investigate." He slid a copy of the report across the desk. "Whitaker is now listed as an endangered missing adult because of his age, exposure risk, unstable housing, and possible medical needs. Patrols have his description. Hospitals and shelters in adjoining counties are being contacted." That took long enough. Graham removed his gloves before answering. Rhett remembered that habit from rescue scenes. Graham always took them off before speaking to someone frightened or angry, as if bare hands made his authority less threatening. "What I will not do," Graham said, "is search a licensed facility because a puppy sniffed a blanket and Barton adjusted his cuff." "I didn't ask you to." "You were about to." Rhett said nothing. Graham leaned forward. "Do not enter Bright Haven's offices. Do not confront employees. Do not tell people Barton is trafficking residents. If Whitaker left records somewhere, bring them to me without rearranging, copying, or interpreting them for an audience." "You think I'm going to make this worse?" I think you spent years doing work where immediate action saved lives. That can become a bad habit when the threat is paperwork." Rhett looked toward the frosted window. Outside, sunlight lay cleanly over the courthouse steps. A county employee sprinkled salt in careful arcs, turning the ice dark one patch at a time. "What if the paperwork is the threat?" Rhett asked. Graham picked up his pen again. "Then we prove it." Laurel was waiting outside with Inez in an old station wagon that smelled of coffee, wool, and onions from the church kitchen. Inez occupied the passenger seat, her carved cane wedged between her knees. A bronze cat brooch fastened the collar of her plum coat. She looked Rhett over as he secured Clem's carrier in the back. "What did the law say?" "The law said not to commit crimes while helping. Always taking the romance out of public service," Inez muttered. Laurel pulled away from the curb. They began with the laundromat. Whitaker had slept there when the temperature dropped below zero, and the manager was willing to pretend not to notice. The place stood behind a gas station near the old freight road, its windows filmed with steam and detergent residue. Inside, machines turned with the slow rhythm of industrial breathing. The owner, Nolan Beach, was a narrow man in his late 60s with a hearing aid, a green accountant's visor, and the permanently damp cuffs of someone who spent his life near broken washers. He remembered Whitaker clearly. "Paid for heat with repairs," Nolan said. "Fixed the coin slot on number 6, made it reject Canadian quarters, which ruined one of my more reliable customers." "Did he leave anything?" Rhett asked. Nolan studied him. "Depends who wants it." Rhett showed him the missing person report. Nolan read the first page, then looked toward Laurel. "He said only give it to the church woman or the boat builder who stopped building boats." Rhett felt Laurel glance at him. Nolan went behind the counter and returned with a plain white envelope. Whitaker's name did not appear on it. Across the front, written in dark pencil, were 3 words: "Not all departures." Rhett placed the envelope on top of a dryer, rather than opening it immediately. Graham had been explicit. Laurel called him. 20 minutes later, Graham arrived, annoyed by the distance, but satisfied that Rhett had obeyed instructions. He photographed the envelope, noted where it had been stored, and opened it with gloved hands. Inside were 7 torn pieces of paper. Each contained a name, date of birth, a string of numbers, and a transfer date. Some had handwritten initials. Others carried small marks shaped like triangles or squares. The last scrap held a sentence written in Whitaker's compact block lettering. "Do not search for people erased from the system. Find the ones who signed permission to disappear." No one spoke for several seconds. Washing machines continued turning behind them. Graham read the sentence again. "That's dramatic," he said. "Whitaker enjoyed drama when paperwork failed," Laurel replied. "Do these numbers mean anything to you?" Inez moved closer. "That one might be a winter assistance identification number." Graham photographed each scrap individually, then called the county office from outside. While he waited for a records liaison, Rhett carried Clem to a plastic chair near the dryers. The puppy woke, sniffed the warm air, and began investigating Rhett's coat buttons with sleepy concentration. Inez sat beside them. "You think the old man was warning you about Bright Haven?" she said. "I think he wanted someone to look." "Looking and understanding are not the same thing." "You've said that before." "Then perhaps you weren't listening correctly." She removed one glove. Her fingernails were painted wine red, though the polish had chipped at the edges. "I signed one of those forms." Rhett turned toward her. "At Bright Haven?" Inez nodded. Laurel stopped speaking to Nolan across the room. "When?" Graham asked, returning through the door. "Last February." He opened his notebook. Inez's mouth hardened. "Do not make me repeat it 3 times, because 3 agencies enjoy different headings." "One account is enough," Graham said. That answer seemed to satisfy her. The form had been presented near 10 at night during a severe cold warning. A Bright Haven coordinator told Inez that a transitional residence outside the county had a private room available. The offer would expire by morning. I said I wanted time to think, Inez explained. She said I was free to refuse. Then she reminded me Bright Haven could not guarantee my bed after Tuesday. Did she directly threaten to remove you? Graham asked. No, that would have been less elegant. What about your cat? Her fingers tightened around the bird-shaped handle of her cane. Marzipan was 16. She had kidney trouble and screamed in moving vehicles like a soul being audited. Despite the subject, Laurel almost smiled. The coordinator said the new place did not accept animals, Inez continued. Bright Haven could arrange temporary surrender through a partner rescue. Temporary was underlined. Did you understand what surrender meant legally? Graham asked. I understood it meant someone with a clipboard could call abandonment by a cleaner name. She had signed, not because she wanted to leave Larkspur Basin, not because she wanted to surrender Marzipan. She signed because snow was striking the windows, her medication was stored behind the nurse's counter, and every question she asked made the available room sound less certain. Whitaker saw the form after midnight, Inez said. He asked if I had a copy. I didn't. He asked if anyone had explained an appeal process. They hadn't. What did he do? Rhett asked. Tore the original in half. Graham frowned. That could have caused serious trouble. It did, mostly for him. Whitaker called Laurel, found a church basement willing to take both Inez and Marzipan, then walked her there before dawn. Inez looked toward the laundromat windows. People imagine coercion as a hand around the wrist. Sometimes it is a warm office and a gentle voice telling you the kind choice is to stop inconveniencing everyone. The sentence stayed with Rhett long after they left. They spent the afternoon tracing Whitaker's recent places. At the old bus depot, they found nothing except a grocery receipt and a patch of cardboard shaped to fit beneath a bench. At a warehouse behind the church, Laurel discovered an empty tin of the cough drops Whitaker favored, but no papers. Near the railway spur, an abandoned repair garage held a camp cot, 3 canned peaches, and a county transit map pinned to the wall. Several routes had been marked in pencil, but Graham could not determine when. Nothing amounted to proof. Yet the absence no longer felt random. Whitaker had moved through town with the habits of someone separating information, never sleeping beside everything he knew. By evening, Graham called them back to the sheriff's office. The 7 names had been located. None were missing. Every person had a completed record showing voluntary relocation from Bright Haven to a residential or transitional facility outside the county. Each file contained a signed consent for voluntary relocation assistance. So Barton told the truth, Rhett said. Graham looked up from the files. He told part of it. 2 of the residents had been moved to licensed assisted living facilities. 1 had later entered a hospital. The remaining 4 had addresses associated with short-term lodging programs. All legal? Laurel asked. On the surface, Inez tapped 1 page. Was the form signed the same night it was offered? Graham checked. 3 were. Were copies provided? Not recorded. Independent advocate present? No requirement unless competency is disputed. Inez sat back. There's your trick. It is not automatically a crime, Graham said. I didn't call it one. The form stated clearly that residents could refuse without penalty, but a sentence beneath the signature acknowledged that Bright Haven could not guarantee continued placement because of fluctuating emergency capacity. Rhett read it twice. The words did not threaten anyone. They merely placed the possibility of freezing directly beside the line where a frightened person was expected to choose freely. That evening, Rhett returned to Broken Fir Road with Clem asleep beside him. He should have been exhausted. Instead, the day had left him restless. He carried the puppy inside, fed him, then stood for several minutes before the locked workshop. The key had remained on his ring for 4 years. Rhett had told himself that was practical. Selling the equipment would require entering. Repairing the roof might require access. Practical reasons accumulated easily around doors a man was afraid to open. Clem waddled across the snow between the house and workshop, nose low. "Not tonight," Rhett said. The puppy ignored him and sat beside the threshold. A thin, metallic scent rose from beneath the door, mingled with old cedar and machine oil. Clem lifted his head toward the tag at his own collar, then scratched once at the wood. Rhett knew the reaction meant little. The tag had spent years among Elspeth's belongings. The workshop likely contained objects carrying similar smells. Still, he placed the key in the lock. The hinges resisted. Cold, dusty air moved out when the door opened. Rhett stood beneath the dark rafters while his flashlight passed over the cupboard workbenches, hanging clamps, unfinished hull frame, and pale drifts of sawdust that had hardened into the floor's cracks. Clem entered without hesitation. He did not run toward some hidden secret. He sniffed slowly, sneezed twice, and became distracted by a curled wood shaving. Rhett almost laughed. Then Clem moved toward a cabinet beneath Elspeth's old desk. The puppy pawed at a small wooden box pushed against the back panel. Rhett recognized it. Elspeth had used the box for route cards, donation receipts, and whatever correspondence she did not want lost among household bills. He sat on the floor and lifted the lid. The smell of old paper and cedar rose from inside. There were letters from Laurel, volunteer maps, veterinary invoices bearing Lenora's name, and drafts of proposals carrying both Elspeth's and Whitaker's handwritten notes. One packet was titled Winter Continuity Voucher Pilot Rhett, read beneath the beam of his flashlight. The program offered additional county reimbursement when shelters helped older residents move into stable, longer-term accommodation. The intention was sensible. Emergency shelters were not homes. People needed continuity, medical support, and places where they would not be turned back onto the street when winter funding ended. Elspeth's notes filled the margins. Resident must choose. Animal companions cannot be treated as excess property. Success must mean 6 months safe, not one bed emptied. Whitaker's handwriting appeared beside hers. County will only fund what can be counted, need measurable outcome. On a later draft, someone had changed the reimbursement trigger. Payment would be released when a relocation was completed and documented, not after 6 months of stability. The quality of the destination had become secondary to the fact of departure. Rhett found a letter from Whitaker dated 7 years earlier. Elspeth, I know your concern, but if we wait for a perfect safeguard, the pilot dies in committee. We get the bridge built first. We strengthen the rails after people start crossing. Elspeth had written beneath it in purple ink, Bridges are dangerous places to postpone the rails. Rhett read that sentence several times. Whitaker had not merely discovered a corrupted program from the outside. He had helped build its logic. Perhaps he had believed speed would save people. Perhaps it had in the beginning. Then organizations learned that every completed transfer produced funding, freed another bed, and looked excellent in annual reports. A system designed to create homes had begun rewarding departures. Clem settled against Rhett's thigh, tired from exploring. At the bottom of the box lay another torn scrap matching those from the laundromat. It contained one handwritten address: Cedar Run Transitional Lodge, County Line Road, Mile 18. Below it, Whitaker had drawn a small square, the same mark beside 4 names on the list. Rhett did not feel the clean anger he expected. Instead, he imagined Whitaker younger, seated in a county meeting, defending imperfect rules because people were freezing while committees debated. He imagined the relief when the first person received housing, then the first compromise. The first troubling transfer. The first time Whitaker convinced himself there would be time to correct it later. Guilt did not always begin with cruelty. Sometimes it began with a good intention, a man defended too long after it stopped being good. Rhett photographed nothing. He moved none of the papers except the Cedar Run scrap, which he placed on top of the open box without touching its written surface. Then he called Graham. "I found more records," Rhett said. "Did you handle them?" "The box, yes, the papers only enough to read the first pages." Graham sighed, but not angrily. "What do they show?" "That Whitaker helped design the funding model." Silence followed. "And the destination on 4 of the transfers?" Rhett looked at the address. Cedar Run Transitional Lodge. Outside, snow began tapping softly against the workshop roof. Clem placed one paw over Rhett's boot and fell asleep. For the first time, Whitaker's disappearance no longer looked like the act of a blameless man exposing someone else's corruption. It looked like the unfinished confession of a man who had finally returned to a bridge and discovered where it had been carrying people. Cedar Run Transitional Lodge looked respectable from the road. That was the first thing Rhett distrusted about it. The property stood 18 miles west of Larkspur Basin, where the county highway narrowed between low hills and crossed a shallow river beneath a steel bridge. Snow had been cleared from the driveway in 2 careful strips. A wooden sign near the entrance displayed the image of a cedar tree and the words, "Recovery, Rest, Renewal." The main building had once been a roadside lodge. Its long roof carried an even layer of snow, and 12 identical doors faced a parking lot where 3 medical transport vans sat in a neat row. From a distance, the place could have appeared quiet rather than isolated. Graham parked the patrol vehicle near the entrance. "This is a welfare check," he reminded them. "Not a search." Rhett sat in the rear seat beside Laurel, his hands resting on his knees. He had left Clem with Lenora after deciding a puppy had no place on an official visit to a residential facility. The absence felt oddly physical. For 3 days he had grown accustomed to the small weight moving near his boots and the soft scrape of claws following him from room to room. Now the silence beside him seemed too large. Graham turned halfway in his seat. "You answer only if asked. You do not walk past any closed door. You do not touch anything." "You covered that before we left town." "I'm covering it again because your face suggests disagreement." "My face always suggests disagreement." "That is unfortunately true." Laurel hid a smile behind one gloved hand. A dark sedan arrived behind them. Investigator Corinne Vale stepped out carrying a rigid brown document case. She was 45, tall and spare, with a long charcoal coat buttoned to the throat, and black hair cut short around an angular face. A few silver strands crossed the longer section above her forehead. Her movements were economical, without being hurried, as if she had learned that frightened people noticed every gesture made by someone carrying authority. She greeted Graham, then looked at Rhett. "Mr. Calder." "You know who I am." "I read the file." It was more reliable than asking the town. Her gray eyes moved briefly to Laurel. "Reverend Finch, you are here as the person who reported concern about one former resident's medical condition. Mr. Calder, you identified the transfer address through records belonging to your late wife." "That sounds accurate." "It needs to remain accurate. Neither of you is part of the inspection team." "Are you expecting trouble?" Laurel asked. "I expect people to become protective when oversight arrives without an appointment." Corinne opened the document case. One of the names on Whitaker's list belonged to Harlan Beckett, 72, who had chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. His last confirmed medical appointment had occurred before his transfer from Bright Haven. Cedar Run had failed to answer 2 routine requests from the county clinic asking whether his oxygen prescription had been continued. That was not enough for a warrant. It was enough for a welfare check. The front door opened before they reached it. A woman in navy scrubs stood beneath the porch light. Her name badge identified her as Dana Pritchard, site coordinator. She was perhaps 50, with cropped blonde hair, a narrow mouth, and the tired posture of someone who had spent the morning preparing for an inspection she claimed not to expect. "Deputy Sutter," she said. "Investigator Vale, this is unusual." "So is failing to return medical verification," Corinne replied. "We sent the records yesterday." The clinic received nothing. Dana's gaze moved to Rhett and Laurel. "These people cannot enter resident areas." "They are aware," Graham said. The lobby had been recently painted in a pale yellow meant to resemble warmth. A bowl of wrapped peppermints sat beside a guest book. Framed landscapes covered the walls, all mountains in summer, green and empty of people. The air carried the scent of lemon cleaner over something older and damp. Dana guided Corinne and Graham to a small office near the reception desk. Rhett and Laurel were instructed to remain in the lobby. Through the glass partition, Rhett watched Corinne remove a silver clip from her case and organize forms into 3 colored sections. She did not raise her voice. Dana did enough talking for both of them. Yes, residents are free to leave. Yes, all placements are voluntary. Yes, medication is managed through outside providers. No, Cedar Run was not an assisted living facility. It was transitional lodging. No, it was not required to maintain full clinical staff. No, North Meridian Mobility did not control the lodge. It merely provided contracted transportation. Every answer seemed designed to occupy the narrow space between responsibility and regulation. Laurel sat beside Rhett on a vinyl chair. "You're grinding your teeth," she said. "I'm sitting quietly." "Those are not mutually exclusive." A television near the ceiling played a daytime cooking program with the sound muted. Beneath it, a printed schedule listed breakfast at 7, lunch at noon, medication reminder at 6, and lights out at 10. No names appeared anywhere. Rhett studied the locked door leading farther into the building. "They knew we were coming," he murmured. "Corinne contacted them 20 minutes ago." "That is enough time to move people." Laurel turned toward him. "Or enough time to gather records, clean a lobby, and make anxious staff look suspicious, even if nothing criminal is happening." "You defend them often?" "I defend accuracy." The answer irritated him because it sounded like Graham. Corinne emerged from the office. "Mr. Beckett is here," she said. "Ms. Pritchard has agreed to bring him to the lobby." "Agreed?" Rhett asked. "This is still a voluntary welfare check." Dana disappeared through the locked door. Several minutes passed. A heater clicked beneath the front window, blowing air that smelled faintly scorched. Somewhere deeper in the building, a metal cart rattled, then stopped abruptly. The door opened again. An elderly man stepped into the lobby before Dana could return. He was thin and slightly stooped, wearing an oversized olive military surplus coat over a blue-gray checked shirt. A red wool cap sat crooked on his white hair. His pale eyes moved from Corinne to Graham, and then to Rhett with the guarded attention of someone deciding whether strangers represented help or another transfer. Dana appeared behind him. "Mr. Dade, residents were asked to remain in the common room." "I heard visitors." "This does not concern you." The man's hand tightened around a small pocket radio wrapped in a handkerchief. Corinne stepped forward, though not close enough to crowd him. "Your name is Merrick Dade?" He nodded. "I'm Corinne Vale with Adult Protective Services. You are not in trouble." Merrick looked past her toward Dana. People who were free to speak did not usually check a staff member's face before answering. Rhett saw Graham notice it too. "I knew Whitaker," Merrick said. Dana's expression hardened. "Mr. Dade, that is unrelated to the medical inquiry." "He came here." The words were soft, but the room changed around them. Rhett stood. Laurel touched his sleeve, warning him without looking. "When?" Corinne asked. Merrick adjusted the radio's tuning knob, although the device was switched off. 4 days before the big storm. Was he staying here? No, he came to warn us. Dana moved toward him. Mr. Dade has difficulty with dates. Merrick backed away. His heel struck the locked door, which had not fully latched behind him. It swung inward. Cold air moved into the lobby. For one brief opening, Rhett saw beyond the carefully painted entrance. A long corridor extended toward the back of the lodge. Plastic curtains divided sections that had once been motel rooms. An extension cord ran beneath the curtains toward a portable heater glowing orange near the wall. The windows at the far end were white with frost along their lower panes. A woman in a sweater sat wrapped in 2 blankets beside a mobility walker. Another resident stood near a door wearing gloves indoors. No one appeared imprisoned. No one bore visible injuries. That made the sight harder to dismiss. The building was not a dungeon. It was simply too cold, too temporary, and too uncertain for people who had been told they had reached stable housing. Dana pulled the door shut. The boiler is undergoing repair. Corinne's gaze sharpened. How long? Since yesterday? Your maintenance log says the problem was first reported 6 days ago. Dana glanced toward the office. The mistake had been small. Her reaction made it larger. Graham stepped between Merrick and the door, not blocking him from Corinne, but preventing Dana from ushering him away. Mr. Dade, he said, removing his gloves. Would you like to speak privately? Merrick's eyes moved toward the corridor. If I do, where do I sleep tonight? No one answered immediately. That was answer enough. Corinne's voice became quieter. Speaking to me does not legally cancel your placement. That isn't what I asked. Merrick's fingers trembled over the radio. They say Cedar Run is temporary. Then they say if we complain, the next place may be farther away. They say funding follows cooperation. They don't say we lose anything. They just explain how easily things can become unavailable. Laurel rose slowly. What did Whitaker tell you? Merrick glanced again at Dana. Corinne closed the office door between the lobby and reception desk, placing herself so Dana remained visible but could no longer stand directly over him. He had a ledger, Merrick said. Not a little notebook. A thick one with names and dates. He said not to sign any new transport forms until someone explained where we were going and who got paid for the trip. Did he leave the ledger here? Graham asked. No. What happened to him? 2 men from North Meridian came, Dana interrupted. They were drivers responding to a trespass complaint. Merrick flinched at the word. They took him outside, he continued. They didn't hit him. They didn't need to. One told him if he returned, they'd have him arrested for disturbing vulnerable residents. Did you recognize the men? Corinne asked. One drove the gray van. The other wore a black jacket with a silver ring on his smallest finger. Rhett remembered nothing like that from Bright Haven. Corinne wrote the detail without comment. Did Whitaker say where he was going? He said he had to get something to a man who built boats. Rhett felt Laurel turn toward him. Merrick finally looked directly at Rhett. You're Calder? It was not a question. Yes? He said your wife warned him years ago. About what? That once a system learns to call departure success, it stops asking where people arrive. Dana's face lost what remained of its practiced patience. This conversation is agitating him. No, Merrick said. His voice was still quiet, but this time it did not shake. It is agitating you. The sentence landed with more force than a shout. Corinne asked Graham to escort Merrick to the patrol vehicle for a private interview. Merrick hesitated until Graham promised he would return him unless a medical professional determined the building was unsafe. Before leaving, Merrick turned the dead radio knob once more. Ask about the animal forms, he told Corinne. They say our pets are complications. Then they charge the county to solve us. Dana denied knowing what he meant. Corinne did not argue. She requested heating records, resident consent documents, transport contracts, medication logs, and the names of every outside company paid by Cedar Run. Dana refused access beyond what the welfare check allowed. Corinne accepted the refusal. Rhett understood then that restraint was not the same as retreat. Every refusal became part of the record. They left Cedar Run 2 hours later. Harlan Beckett was alive and receiving oxygen, though Corinne ordered an immediate clinical review because his prescription had been altered without a clear physician's authorization. The portable heaters were inadequate, but not yet enough by themselves to condemn the facility. Merrick's interview established concern, not proof of a crime. The drive back to Larkspur Basin was silent until Corinne's phone rang. She listened for several minutes, asking only short questions. When the call ended, she looked toward Graham. Corporate registrations came back. North Meridian Mobility was formerly owned by a holding company called Meridian Rural Access. Cedar Run leased its property from another company. Bright Haven had no direct ownership in either. So they're separate, Graham said. On paper. Corinne opened her case on her lap. All three use the same accounting consultant. 2 share a mail processing address in Casper. North Meridian's director is Lowell Vane. Laurel frowned. Should that name mean something? He is Barton Kells's brother-in-law. Rhett looked through the window at the white fields passing beyond the road. There it was, not proof, but structure. A shelter approved a transfer, a transport company billed for moving the resident. A lodge received payment for temporary placement. Separate entities, separate invoices, separate explanations. The same family stood near the center of all three. By the time they reached town, Barton had already begun defending himself. A letter from Bright Haven's attorney was waiting at the church. It warned Laurel against making unverified statements that could endanger county funding and disrupt services for vulnerable residents. Graham received a formal request that he withdraw from the Whitaker case because of his prior rescue work with Rhett. Residents at Bright Haven were told that outside criticism might cause donors to reconsider winter support. Nothing in those actions was openly threatening. Each simply placed the possible suffering of homeless people on the shoulders of anyone who continued asking questions. The effect spread quickly. A bakery owner who had once donated bread to Winter Kitchen told Laurel he could not afford political trouble. 2 church volunteers failed to arrive for the evening meal. Someone left a note beneath the church door. If Bright Haven closes, where do you expect them to sleep? Rhett read it twice. The question was unfair. It was also valid. That night he drove home alone. Lenora had returned Clem after the clinic closed, and the puppy slept inside the house while Rhett remained outside in the truck. Snow shone beneath the porch light. Smoke rose from the chimney. The windows held a warm amber glow that once would have meant Elspeth was waiting inside. Rhett did not turn off the engine. He imagined Bright Haven losing funding before another shelter existed. Cedar Run emptying its rooms without warning. People with medication, walkers, cats, dogs, and nowhere to go becoming collateral damage in a fight intended to protect them. He had spent much of his life believing danger demanded forward motion. Now every direction seemed capable of harming someone. Through the front window, Clem appeared. The puppy stood on the rug with his uneven ears lifted. He scratched once at the inside of the door, then sat down. He did not whine. He did not paw again. He simply waited. Rhett shut off the engine. Cold gathered immediately around the truck. He crossed the yard and climbed the porch steps. When he opened the door, Clem did not rush outside or leap against him. The puppy stepped backward. Just one small step, leaving room at the threshold. Rhett stood there longer than necessary, one hand resting on the latch. He had once believed opening a door meant taking responsibility for everything that came through it. Perhaps that was why he had kept so many closed. Clem sat beyond the threshold, watching him without demand. Rhett entered. The door closed gently behind him. He still did not know how to expose a broken system without breaking the people trapped inside it. But perhaps opening a door had never meant possessing every answer. Perhaps it only meant refusing to let someone remain outside while the answers were being found. Dale Mercer remembered the maintenance shack because Whitaker had asked about it twice. The first time had been 3 winters earlier when a section of Broken Fir Road washed out during spring thaw. The second had been on the night Dale gave him a ride through the storm. He wanted to know if the old county key still worked, Dale said. They stood beside his snowplow in the sheriff's maintenance yard. Morning sunlight flashed against the orange blade, bright enough to hurt the eyes. Dale held his dented blue thermos beneath one arm while Graham wrote in a notebook. "What did you tell him?" Graham asked. "That the county changed the lock after teenagers started using the shack for bad decisions." "Did he say why he cared?" Dale shook his head. "He said abandoned buildings remember people better than offices do." Rhett stood several feet away, with Clem tucked inside the front of his parka. The puppy had grown stronger over the past week, but the cold still reached him quickly. Only his golden-striped forehead and one uneven ear showed above the zipper. Clem sneezed. Dale glanced over. "That dog has opinions about government property." "He has opinions about wind," Rhett replied. Graham closed the notebook. The maintenance shack sat beyond the bend where Rhett had found Whitaker's missing brass button. Search crews had checked the immediate road and tree line the morning after the storm, but the shack had been locked and appeared unused. No one had known Whitaker might have been trying to reach it. By noon, Graham returned with 2 volunteer rescuers, a county maintenance supervisor, and permission to enter. The shack crouched beneath a stand of lodgepole pines, half buried by drifted snow. Its windows were boarded from the inside. A rusted ventilation pipe leaned away from the roof, as if exhausted by years of weather. The new lock had been forced. Not recently enough to leave bright metal, but recently enough that the broken edge had not fully rusted. Inside, the air smelled of mouse droppings, damp wood, and cold iron. A narrow cot stood against the rear wall. Someone had covered it with flattened cardboard. An empty soup tin rested nearby, along with 2 cough-drop wrappers, a burnt candle stub, and a length of wool torn from the same kind of gray blanket used at Bright Haven. Graham photographed everything before anyone moved farther in. "No ledger," one rescuer said after checking beneath the cot. Rhett studied the room. Whitaker had slept here, perhaps before climbing the final distance to Rhett's house. Yet the space looked interrupted rather than abandoned. One corner of the cardboard bedding had been folded back. A jar lid beside the cot held several screws and 2 quarters, arranged neatly as though their owner expected to return. Near the wall, Clem began squirming inside Rhett's coat. "You stay put," Rhett murmured. The puppy pressed his nose toward a gap between 2 floorboards. Rhett did not set him down. Instead, he crouched and directed his flashlight into the opening. A white edge showed beneath the floor. Graham used a flat bar from the maintenance truck to lift one warped board. Underneath lay a folded paper wrapped in a plastic grocery bag. It was not the ledger. The paper held only 3 words: North County Memorial. Beneath them was a patient intake number and a date from 6 days earlier. Graham stared at it. "That hospital is 34 miles east." "Why would Whitaker leave the name here?" Rhett asked. Maybe he didn't. The intake number had been written in different handwriting from Whitaker's block script. The letters were hurried and slanted, likely copied by someone else. Dale rubbed his beard. "There's a plow crew out of North County that covers the state road after the county line." Graham was already reaching for his phone. The answer took less than 20 minutes. An unidentified elderly man had been brought to North County Memorial the morning after the storm. A plow operator found him unconscious near a drainage culvert below the service road. He carried no wallet, only several loose papers too wet to read, a brass key, and an old transit token. The hospital had entered him under an emergency placeholder name. His condition had prevented a reliable interview. By late afternoon, Rhett stood in a hospital corridor with Clem inside a soft-sided carrier and a visitor badge clipped to his chest. The building was warm in the stale-controlled way hospitals were warm. White light flattened every surface. Carts rolled quietly over polished floors. Somewhere nearby, a machine gave 3 soft beeps at regular intervals, patient as a metronome. A nurse explained that Whitaker had pneumonia, dehydration, and worsening heart failure. He had drifted in and out of awareness for several days. His speech was clearer now, though any conversation had to remain short. "No dog in the room," she said. Rhett nodded. "He can see the puppy through the glass for a minute if the patient remains calm." The nurse looked at him carefully. "So can you." Rhett did not ask what she meant. Whitaker lay beneath a pale blanket near the window. Without the wool coat, cap, and winter dirt, he looked smaller than Rhett remembered. His white beard had been trimmed. Clear tubing ran beneath his nose. A monitor traced his heartbeat in green lines across a black screen. For the first few seconds, Whitaker did not recognize him. Then his eyes moved toward the carrier. Clem pressed his nose against the mesh. Whitaker's mouth lifted. "Well," he whispered. The difficult one kept the difficult one. Rhett pulled a chair closer. "I haven't kept anyone." "You came 34 miles. You were missing." "People say that when they mean inconveniently located." His voice was weak, but the dry humor remained. Rhett looked at the oxygen line, the bruising along Whitaker's thin hands, and the slow effort required for each breath. "You said you would come back before daylight." "I also once said I could repair a transmission with a fence hinge. Age improves judgment unevenly." "You nearly died." Whitaker's eyes shifted toward the window. "I know." The simple admission removed the anger Rhett had prepared. For a while, neither man spoke. Clem pawed once at the carrier door, then settled when Rhett placed his hand against the mesh. Whitaker watched the gesture. "Lenora told you about Clover?" "She told me Clem came from the last litter in that line." "Elspeth never chose him." "I figured that out." "Did you?" Rhett leaned back. Whitaker's breathing became rougher for several seconds. The monitor quickened, then settled again. "Elspeth asked me to keep an eye on Clover's line," he said. "That was all. She said if one of those dogs ever needed the kind of house you could provide, I should consider bringing it to you. She knew I didn't want a dog. She knew you would refuse anything described as hope." Rhett looked at him. Whitaker managed a faint shrug beneath the blanket. "She said responsibility got through your defenses faster." That line was in the church photograph. She wrote it everywhere, napkins. Receipts? Once on the back of a parking citation I was contesting. Despite himself, Rhett smiled. It vanished quickly. "Why, Clem?" "The rescue property was being sold. The other pups had homes. He didn't." "That's it?" "That should be enough." Whitaker turned his face toward the carrier. Clem's black-rimmed left eye remained fixed on him. "He was weak," Whitaker continued. "Needed feeding every few hours. Needed someone who would notice whether his breathing changed during the night." "You assumed I would?" "I knew you would." "You didn't know anything about me." "I knew your wife." "That is not the same thing." "No." Whitaker closed his eyes briefly. "When Elspeth was dying, she worried you would turn grief into an occupation." The words struck harder than accusation. Rhett's shoulders stiffened. Whitaker opened his eyes again. I did not bring Clem because she left instructions from beyond the grave. I brought him because I saw your house every winter. Same porch light, same truck, never another set of tracks. That was none of your business. Correct. Whitaker's voice grew rough but steady. People outside can die of cold in one night. People behind closed doors can die in slower ways. No ambulance comes for that kind. Rhett stood. For a moment, the chair legs scraped sharply against the floor. The nurse looked through the glass from her station. Whitaker did not flinch. You had no right. No? You used Elspeth's name. Yes? You put a sick puppy in my arms because you thought you understood what I needed. Yes? Each answer denied Rhett the relief of argument. Whitaker turned toward the window again. I was wrong to decide for you. I was right that the dog needed a home. Both things can be true. Rhett remained standing. Clem gave a small sound from the carrier. Not a whine. A soft, questioning breath. Rhett looked down at him. The puppy had one paw resting against the door, waiting rather than demanding. Rhett sat again. Where is the ledger? He asked. Whitaker's face changed. The humor drained from it. Not one place. He had learned that lesson after 2 men from North Meridian searched his belongings outside Cedar Run. They found nothing useful because he had already separated the records. The handwritten names and transfer dates were hidden inside a false panel beneath the old church soup van. Copies of billing statements had been mailed to a rented postal box under Laurel's name, without her knowledge, because Whitaker believed no one would risk opening church mail. Photographs of consent forms, transport logs, and duplicate invoices were stored on a memory card inside an old tabletop radio at Nolan Beach's laundromat. You left Laurel's name on a rented box? Rhett asked. She has a trustworthy face. She may kill you. Then I will have died under appropriate pastoral supervision. Rhett ignored the attempt at humor. What does the ledger prove? By itself? Not enough. Whitaker's honesty remained relentless. The names showed patterns, people transferred before inspections. Residents with animals marked for outside placement more often than those without. Bright Haven billed one program for shelter nights, while Cedar Run billed another program for transitional lodging during overlapping dates. North Meridian invoiced transport even when the same vehicle carried multiple residents, charging each as a separate specialized trip. But the worst part isn't in the billing, Whitaker said. It's in the signatures. Merrick's? And others? Whitaker's fingers moved restlessly over the blanket. Forms offered late. Medications held at the desk. Beds described as uncertain. Pets called barriers. Every sentence legal by itself. And you helped build the program. The room seemed to contract. Whitaker looked at his hands. Yes? There was no defense in the word. He had designed early transfer routes, helped draft the first voucher language, and argued that shelters needed immediate reimbursement when residents accepted long-term placements. The county had resisted paying for 6 months of follow-up. Whitaker supported payment at the moment of transfer because people needed beds quickly. Elspeth warned me, he said. Rhett remembered the purple sentence from the workshop file. Bridges are dangerous places to postpone the rails. I told her we would strengthen safeguards after the pilot survived its first year, Whitaker continued. Then the numbers looked good. Fewer people on winter lists, more completed placements. Everyone congratulated everyone. When did you know it had gone wrong? Earlier than I admitted. The admission came almost inaudibly. Whitaker had noticed elderly residents returning to the county after their temporary placements failed. Some had lost animals during transfer. Others vanished from familiar clinics because their new lodging lay too far away. He raised concerns in meetings, then accepted reassurances. He asked for audits, then stopped asking when his own housing collapsed and survival consumed what remained of his strength. Shame is efficient, he said. It convinces a man that silence is humility. Elspeth knew? She knew I was worried. She died before I understood how far it had gone. And after? I kept thinking I needed complete proof before speaking. Complete proof is a luxurious standard when people are being moved every week. Rhett watched the green line rise and fall on the monitor. Whitaker was not confessing because he expected forgiveness. He was placing responsibility where it belonged, including on himself. It made him harder to admire. It also made him easier to believe. The door opened, and Corinne entered carrying her brown document case. Graham followed. They had recovered the first 2 evidence caches. Nolan was searching for the radio under Corinne's supervision. Corinne stood beside Whitaker's bed. Mr. Sloan, I need your consent to use your statement and records in an adult protection inquiry. Whitaker looked at her. Will it keep anyone from being moved tomorrow? Possibly. Then yes. Corinne did not promise more. She explained that the evidence suggested 3 Brighthaven residents were scheduled for relocation before an emergency state review. One of the names was Merrick Dade. Merrick refused, Rhett said. Corinne opened a folder. His file contains a signed consent form. Whitaker's eyes sharpened. He did not sign another form. The signature matches an older document. Graham placed 2 enlarged copies on the bedside table. The signatures were identical, not merely similar, but identical in angle, spacing, and the uneven pressure at the final letter. Copied. A transfer could still proceed unless Corinne obtained an emergency order or Merrick formally revoked consent before departure. Brighthaven had scheduled the transport for the following afternoon. Why move him now? Rhett asked. The state review begins the next morning, Corinne replied. Merrick is a direct witness to conditions at Cedar Run and Whitaker's visit. Whitaker tried to sit higher. The effort triggered a coughing fit. Rhett reached for the nurse call button, but Whitaker caught his wrist. Barton knows, he managed. Knows what? Corinne asked. That I split the records. Lowell saw me at the post office. They may not know what I kept, but they know I kept something. The nurse entered and ended the visit. Rhett lifted Clem's carrier. Before he reached the door, Whitaker called his name. Rhett turned. The old man looked exhausted, stripped of mystery, and nearly stripped of time. I did not give you Clem to make you forgive me, he said. Rhett waited. I gave him to you because even guilty men can still keep one good promise. Outside the room, Clem stood on unsteady legs inside the carrier and pressed his forehead against the mesh. Rhett placed 2 fingers against the golden stripe between the puppy's eyes. Through the glass, Whitaker watched them. The old man had not delivered a miracle to Rhett's door. He had delivered a living responsibility while carrying a confession he had postponed until winter nearly buried him with it. At the end of the corridor, Corinne's phone rang. She listened, then turned toward Graham. The 3rd cache has been recovered. Her expression offered no relief. North Meridian moved the departure time. The transport leaves Brighthaven tomorrow morning. The elevator doors opened behind them. For one suspended moment, Rhett saw their reflections in the polished metal. Corinne with her case, Graham in his brown uniform, Rhett holding the puppy, and behind the glass, Whitaker lying beneath hospital light. A system built over years had begun moving faster than the people trying to stop it. And somewhere inside Brighthaven, 3 signatures were already being treated as permission. The transfer van left Brighthaven at 2:17 in the afternoon. By 2:23, the first snow began striking the church windows. It did not fall softly. The flakes came sideways in quick white lines, carried by a wind that had arrived several hours earlier than the county forecast predicted. Main Street disappeared one storefront at a time. Tires hissed through fresh slush, and the bronze bell above the church door shook without anyone entering. Rhett stood beside a long folding table in the winter kitchen, listening to Corinne through Laurel's speakerphone. "The emergency order is with the judge," Corinne said. "Until it is signed, the consent documents remain valid on their face." "Merrick's signature was copied," Rhett said. "We know that. The court has not formally determined it." "So they can transport him while we wait for someone to determine the obvious?" "Do not make me defend the speed of the legal system. I have already insulted it twice today." Laurel stood near the kitchen door with one hand pressed to her glasses. Inez sat beneath the coat rack, her cane resting across her knees. She had been silent since learning Merrick was among the 3 residents scheduled to leave. Clem occupied a padded enclosure near the radiator. The puppy had spent most of the afternoon sleeping after his medication and feeding. His golden head rested on the edge of the old gray blanket Laurel had brought from storage. One ear stood upright. The other leaned outward, as though unsure whether alarm required full participation. Graham's voice came through the phone from his patrol vehicle. North Meridian filed a route notice for State Highway 9. "They won't take Highway 9, Inez said. Everyone turned toward her. She looked annoyed by the attention. "Last winter, the van took me east for what they called an orientation visit. The driver complained about the way station on 9. Said company vehicles lost too much time answering questions about passenger logs." "Where did he go instead?" Graham asked. "I don't know the roads." "Think about landmarks." Inez closed her eyes. A red water tower, an old motel with half a horse painted on the sign, then trees, too many trees. "That could describe half the county," Rhett said. Clem woke suddenly. A volunteer had lifted the gray Brighthaven blanket from the enclosure to shake loose several crumbs. The puppy rose too quickly, stumbled, and began barking at the cloth. Not at the woman holding it, at the blanket. His small body stiffened. The fur along his narrow shoulders lifted as he backed toward the radiator. Rhett crossed the room and crouched beside him. "Easy?" Clem continued staring at the gray wool. The smell of antiseptic and muscle rub had strengthened near the heat. Inez's face changed. Those blankets were on the van. Laurel lowered the cloth. "What?" "When Brighthaven moved people in winter, they wrapped everyone in those before taking them through the back entrance. I remember the smell." She gripped the carved head of her cane. "The driver said the Crown Elk route was faster because there were no inspection stops." Graham answered immediately. "Crown Elk Ridge connects with County Line Road beyond the state checkpoint." "And it passes near Cedar Run," Corinne added. Rhett stood. The route made practical sense. It also made no sense in worsening weather. Crown Elk Road climbed along the northern face of the ridge, where wind crossed open slopes before dropping into a narrow pine corridor. The county rarely closed it first because fewer people used it. That did not make it safer. "Graham," Rhett said, "the east switchback ices before the rest of the ridge. If they entered from Miller Road, they'll reach it in 40 minutes. "I'm heading there." "I'm coming." "No?" "You asked the rescue team to stand by." "I asked trained volunteers." "I trained half of them." "That does not make you law enforcement." "It makes me useful if the van leaves the road." Silence held on the call. Corinne broke it. "Rhett may accompany the rescue unit as a cold weather specialist. He does not approach the van unless Graham requests assistance." "I understand." "No, you understand commands. I need you to understand limits." Rhett looked toward Clem. The puppy had stopped barking. He was pressed against Inez's boot now, watching the blanket from a safer distance. "I understand the limit," Rhett said. Laurel ended the call and reached for Rhett's rescue coat from the hook. "You are not taking Clem." "I wasn't planning to." "Good. I enjoy preventing arguments before men know they intend to have them." Rhett pulled on the navy cold-weather jacket. Laurel zipped the front herself when his gloved hand missed the pull tab. "You bring them back," she said. "That isn't mine to promise." Her hands paused. It was the right answer, though neither of them liked it. "Then help whoever can," she said. The volunteer rescue truck followed Graham's patrol vehicle out of town. Snow erased the road edges beyond the last houses. Rhett sat in the passenger seat beside Owen Marlowe, a retired lineman who led the county's volunteer winter unit. Owen was broad through the chest, with frost already collecting in his white mustache and a red rescue helmet rolling on the dashboard between turns. 2 other volunteers rode in the back with blankets, oxygen, thermal packs, and a collapsible stretcher. Graham's taillights appeared and vanished through the snow ahead. Rhett studied the trees. The wind bent their upper branches eastward. Powder lifted from the ditches and moved across the road in low, fast sheets. Beneath it, the asphalt had begun to shine. "They should turn around," Owen said. "They may not know the storm moved in." "They have weather radio." Rhett said nothing. Weather was information. Orders were something else. 26 miles ahead, North Meridian driver Caleb Voss heard the rear compartment warning tone for the 3rd time. He glanced at the dashboard display. The cabin temperature behind him had dropped to 48 degrees. Caleb was 42, narrow-shouldered and tired-eyed, with a company polo beneath his black winter jacket. He had driven medical routes for 14 years and learned that every employer used the word patient differently when an invoice was involved. The attendant beside him, a young nursing aide named Tara Winslow, twisted in her seat. "They're cold." "The heater will catch up?" "It isn't catching up." Caleb pressed the climate control again. The front vents pushed warm air. The rear system responded with a dull click, and nothing else. His phone rang through the dashboard. Lowell Vane. Caleb answered hands-free. "We have a rear heat failure," he said. "How far are you from Cedar Run?" 45 minutes, maybe more. Road's getting bad." "Continue." "I should return to Bright Haven." "You left under an approved transport window." Returning creates a failed relocation and triggers a service report. "There are 3 elderly passengers in an unheated compartment." "They have blankets." Caleb's jaw tightened. Tara stared at him. "The road advisory changed," Caleb said. "Crown Elk may close." "It has not closed." "Yet?" "Complete the route." Lowell's voice remained calm. "If you abandon the trip without mechanical confirmation, the company will document driver discretion as the cause." Caleb understood the sentence. If anything went wrong, it would belong to him. The call ended. In the rear compartment, Merrick Dade sat with his arms folded around his small radio. He had been separated from his coat during departure and given a gray blanket instead. Across from him sat Alma Rusk, 75, a narrow-faced woman wearing a knitted blue cap and holding a canvas bag against her chest. Beside her, Edwin Phelps, 79, leaned forward over a walker wedged between the seats. No one had explained why the departure time changed. Merrick had asked to call Corinne. An employee told him he could make calls after arrival. Alma's teeth began to chatter. "Is your dog at the new place?" Merrick asked. Her eyes filled. "No?" She had entered Bright Haven with a 12-year-old beagle named Pepper. That morning, a coordinator said Pepper could not travel in the medical van, but would be placed with an approved foster family. Alma had asked to refuse the transfer. The coordinator reminded her that Bright Haven had no guarantee of continued space after the incoming weather emergency. "They said I signed," Alma whispered. "Maybe I did. They put 3 pages in front of me after lights out." "Did you want to leave?" Edwin asked. Alma looked toward the van door. "I wanted not to freeze." The distinction remained between them like another passenger. On Crown Elk Ridge, Graham received confirmation from dispatch that the North Meridian van had passed a private fuel station 12 minutes earlier. It was on the back route. He activated the patrol lights, but not the siren. In snow this thick, noise could not improve visibility. Corinne called. "The judge is reviewing the order. I have also sent a direct revocation form to Merrick's listed phone." "He doesn't have it," Graham said. "Brighthaven took resident phones during departure processing. That is not in their policy. It is now in my report." The road curved upward. Fresh tire tracks appeared through the snow. Dual rear tires, wide enough for a medical transport van. Graham followed. 5 miles farther, the tracks veered once toward the center line, corrected, then disappeared around the east switchback. The van came into view beyond the bend, moving too slowly for the climb and too quickly for the ice. Its rear end slid several inches toward the shoulder. Caleb corrected without braking. Then the vehicle's hazard lights began flashing. Graham closed the distance and activated the external speaker. "North Meridian vehicle, pull over at the next safe turnout." The van continued. Graham repeated the instruction. This time, Caleb's brake lights appeared. There was no proper turnout, only a widened section beside an old Forest Service gate. The van stopped at an angle, its right wheels close to the snowbank. Graham positioned the patrol vehicle behind it. Owen parked the rescue truck farther back to protect the scene. "Stay here," Graham told Rhett through the radio. Rhett remained beside the rescue truck while Graham approached the driver's window. Caleb lowered it several inches. "We're on an authorized medical transport. I'm conducting a safety inspection due to the road advisory and report of equipment failure." "Who reported equipment failure?" "Turn off the engine and open the passenger compartment." Caleb hesitated. Tara spoke before he could answer. "The rear heater is out." Caleb shut his eyes briefly. Then he unlocked the doors. When the rear compartment opened, cold air rolled out. Merrick looked smaller than he had at Cedar Run. His surplus coat was gone, replaced by the gray blanket wrapped around his shoulders. Edwin's lips had taken on a faint bluish cast. Alma clutched her bag with both hands, shaking hard enough that the zipper tapped against a metal buckle. Rhett saw Graham turn toward the rescue truck. That was the request. Rhett and Owen moved in. No one shouted. There was no heroic rush, only practiced work. Owen assessed Edwin's breathing and circulation. Rhett placed thermal packs beneath blankets without pressing them directly to skin. Tara helped transfer Alma to the heated rescue truck while repeating that she had told the driver they should turn back. Merrick refused to move at first. "Where are you taking us?" he asked Graham. "To a county warming station until we confirm your consent and medical condition." "Not Cedar Run?" "Not unless you choose it after speaking privately with Corinne." Merrick's shoulders lowered, only slightly. It was enough. Alma sat inside the rescue truck with a warm oxygen line beneath her nose. Rhett crouched several feet away while Graham recorded her statement on body camera. "Did you consent to this transfer?" Graham asked. "I signed something." "Did you understand that you were agreeing to leave Brighthaven today?" "I understood that they might put me out if I didn't." "Did anyone say those exact words?" "No." "What did they say?" Alma swallowed. "They said the storm would bring more urgent people. They said Pepper made my placement difficult. They said I could refuse, but then they asked where I planned to sleep." Rhett looked away toward the ridge. The storm moved across the trees without regard for legal language. Corinne called again. "The emergency suspension is signed." Graham exhaled. "All 3 transfers?" "All transfers connected to Brighthaven and North Meridian pending individual review. You are authorized to return the residents to county care, not necessarily Brighthaven." "Understood." She added that state investigators were securing Brighthaven's administrative offices. Cedar Run had been ordered not to destroy or relocate records. North Meridian's local dispatch files and electronic devices would be preserved under emergency authority. Barton was suspended from operational control, not arrested, not yet charged. The distinction mattered. Caleb stood near the front of the van with snow collecting in his hair. Graham asked for his phone and the company communications log. Caleb handed them over. "Lowell told me to continue," he said. "You can provide that in a formal statement." "He'll say it was my decision." "Did he say that?" Caleb gave a bitter laugh. "He said it in management language." Tara crossed her arms against the cold. "He told us a failed transfer would go on Caleb's record." Caleb looked toward the 3 passengers inside the heated rescue vehicle. "I should have turned around." Rhett understood the shape of the sentence. Not innocence. Responsibility arriving late. "You can still tell the truth about why you didn't," Rhett said. Caleb studied him. Then he nodded. The county warming station occupied a recreation hall near the highway department. By dusk, Alma, Edwin, and Merrick were inside beneath clean blankets, drinking soup, while nurses checked their temperatures and medications. Pepper the beagle had not been surrendered after all. Laurel found the dog in a temporary kennel room behind Bright Haven and arranged for Lenora to examine her before reunion. When Alma saw Pepper carried through the warming station door, she began crying before the dog reached her. The old beagle pulled at the leash with a strength no one expected. Rhett remained near the wall. The rescue had not ended a system. It had only interrupted one vehicle on one road. Corinne arrived with legal forms and 3 independent advocates. Each resident would be asked separately where they wanted to stay. No decision would be made while they were cold, medicated, frightened, or dependent on the person asking. Merrick saw Rhett and lifted his radio. "Still broken," he said. "You keep adjusting it." "Some repairs require optimism." "That sounds unlike you." "It has been an unusual week." Late that night, Rhett returned to the church. The storm had weakened. Snow still moved beneath the streetlights, but the worst wind had passed. Inside, volunteers folded blankets and cleared empty soup cups. Inez sat with Pepper asleep beside her chair while Alma completed her medical assessment at the warming station. Clem heard Rhett before seeing him. The puppy scrambled from behind the kitchen counter, crossed half the room, then stopped several feet away. His tail moved rapidly, but he waited. Rhett understood. For most of his life, people had come toward him carrying expectations, orders, grief, gratitude, questions he could not answer. Clem offered something simpler, an invitation without seizure. Rhett lowered himself to one knee and opened both arms. "Come here!" Clem ran the remaining distance. His large paws struck Rhett's chest, and his uneven ears flattened with relief. Rhett held him carefully beneath the front legs while the puppy buried his muzzle against the collar of the rescue coat. Rhett looked across the room at Inez, Laurel, and the gray Bright Haven blanket folded on a chair. Clem had not found Cedar Run. He had not identified a forged document or stopped a van. He had reacted to a smell, and Inez had remembered. People had listened. That was the difference. The fight had never been about proving that Rhett, Corinne, Graham, or Whitaker had been right. It was about restoring enough space around frightened people for their answer to become their own again. Clem settled against Rhett's chest. Outside, Crown Elk Road disappeared beneath new snow. But 3 people were no longer being carried across it, as if fear had signed for them. Bright Haven did not close after Crown Elk. That disappointed some people. They wanted chains across the entrance, Barton Kells's name torn from the wall, and every bad decision removed from Larkspur Basin before sunset. Anger preferred clean endings. Winter did not allow them. 38 residents still depended on the building for beds, meals, medication storage, and protection from temperatures that could kill before morning. Closing the doors to punish those in charge would have punished the people inside first. Corinne Vale installed an emergency management board within 48 hours. Barton lost access to staff schedules, financial accounts, resident files, and the building itself. Independent nurses reviewed medications. Every planned transfer was suspended until residents could speak privately with an advocate. Graham's deputies secured the administrative offices while state investigators copied records rather than removing everything and leaving the shelter unable to function. The work was neither dramatic nor satisfying. It involved numbered evidence seals, replacement passwords, temporary payroll approvals, and arguments over who had authority to purchase oatmeal. Rhett spent the first week expecting a second crisis. Instead, he found himself delivering dog food to Brighthaven, repairing a damaged rear door at the warming station, and driving Alma Rusk to Lenora's clinic so Pepper could receive treatment for an infected tooth. Saving someone from a frozen van had required minutes. Giving people choices afterward required calendars. Months passed before Barton Kells and Lowell Vane were formally charged. Investigators found duplicate lodging claims, inflated transport invoices, forged consent records, and payments routed through companies connected by family and shared advisors. Barton had not invented every weakness in the system. He had learned where the rules rewarded appearances, then arranged the numbers so every transfer looked like progress. The truth was uglier than simple greed. Brighthaven had received money for filling beds. It had received additional money for moving residents into stable placement. Cedar Run had billed for receiving them. North Meridian had billed for carrying them there. When placements failed, the same people sometimes returned through the system and generated another round of payments. Human beings became proof that programs were working, even when their lives were not. The indictments made the newspapers. The reforms did not. Those happened on Wednesday afternoons in the church basement, where folding chairs formed an uneven circle around a table covered with coffee rings and draft policies. Whitaker joined the first two meetings by video from a rehabilitation facility. Without his cap and wool coat, he looked almost translucent on the screen. Oxygen tubing ran beneath his nose. His voice tired quickly, but he refused to let anyone shorten his statement. He named the policies he had helped draft. He named the safeguards he had agreed to postpone. He named the meetings where he had accepted reassuring numbers, because questioning them would have required admitting that the bridge he helped build was carrying people somewhere unsafe. Not everyone responded kindly. A former Cedar Run resident asked why Whitaker had waited until he was homeless himself before understanding what the system did to people without power. Whitaker did not defend himself. "I understood earlier," he said. "I acted later." The room became very quiet. That difference belongs in the record. He did not ask to be forgiven. He did not allow anyone to call him the man who exposed the scandal without adding that he had once helped create its foundation. His only demand concerned the new oversight structure. "Stop building help around people who have never needed it," he said. "At least half the votes should belong to those who have slept in the beds, signed the forms, lost the animals, or been told gratitude was the price of warmth." Corinne wrote the sentence into the draft charter. Rhett sat near the back with Clem asleep across his boots. The puppy was growing rapidly now. His legs had lengthened before the rest of him, giving him the uncertain balance of a young animal still learning where his body ended. His right ear stood straight. His left leaned outward, catching every new sound from the room. When Whitaker's image vanished from the screen, Rhett looked toward the locked workshop key on his ring. An idea had been forming for weeks. He did not trust it. That was partly why he spoke. "I have a building," he said. Laurel stopped writing. Inez raised one eyebrow. Rhett explained that the old boat workshop had plumbing, a reinforced roof, a wide loading entrance, and more space than he would ever use again. It would need insulation, bathrooms, fire exits, sleeping rooms, and nearly everything else required for human habitation. "I am not donating it," he added. Merrick Dade, seated beside a repaired tabletop radio, looked confused. Rhett continued before anyone mistook hesitation for retreat. "I'll lease it to a community cooperative for $1 a year, long term. The cooperative controls the program." "Not me." Inez leaned forward on her carved cane. "Can you evict us when you become disagreeable?" "I am already disagreeable." That was not the question. Corinne asked about ownership protections, insurance, zoning, and termination clauses. Rhett had no answers. The room did not applaud. Instead, they began making a list. That was how Elspeth Commons started, not with a ribbon, a speech, or a dead woman's name placed above a finished doorway, but with 19 questions Rhett could not answer and 6 people willing to help find out. Judson Reeve measured the workshop before greeting anyone. The retired architect was 64, long-limbed and slightly bent from decades over drafting tables. Square black glasses sat on his narrow face, and a wooden folding ruler protruded from the pocket of his ink-blue chore coat. "This entrance is too steep," he announced. "Good morning," Rhett replied. "The hallway will be too narrow once you frame the interior rooms." "There is no hallway yet." "Exactly. We can still prevent it." Judson believed architecture revealed what a community truly thought of the people using it. He rejected a rear entrance for residents with animals because it made companionship look like something to hide. He widened doorways for walkers and wheelchairs. He designed small sleeping rooms rather than a single open dormitory because privacy, he said, was not a luxury purchased by having an address. Maribel Shaw arrived carrying a red medication case in distrust for anyone who used the phrase, "We'll figure that out later." At 66, she had short silver curls, a strong square face, and the steady authority of a retired night shift nurse who had spent 30 years noticing problems before physicians finished introducing themselves. She built procedures for medication storage, emergency contacts, infection control, and hospital transfers. When Rhett suggested keeping the first aid cabinet near the kitchen for convenience, Maribel stared at him. Convenient for whom? He moved it. Lenora designed the animal wing with the same lack of sentimentality she brought to her clinic. New arrivals would receive basic examinations. Animals without vaccination records would use a temporary separation area. Volunteers would walk and feed pets when owners entered the hospital. "No one abandons an animal to enter," Lenora said. But love does not eliminate parasites, fear responses, or allergies. Inez and Merrick held 2 of the 3 resident seats on the cooperative board. Inez argued for written guarantees that refusing a placement could never affect a person's current bed without independent review. Merrick demanded that consent forms be short enough to read without a legal dictionary and available in large print. Laurel developed the kitchen around shared work rather than charity service. Residents who wished to cook, clean, plan menus, or complain about soup could participate. Those who did not wish to perform gratitude received meals anyway. The first winter, Elspeth Commons opened only 8 beds. The eastern half of the workshop remained sealed behind plastic sheeting. Construction dust collected on unfinished frames. The small kitchen had mismatched cabinets, and the boiler made a metallic knock whenever it started. Yet the rooms were warm. 4 allowed animals immediately. The other 4 remained separated for residents with allergies or fear of dogs. Above the front desk hung no portrait of Elspeth. Rhett had resisted using her name at all. Laurel eventually showed him one of Elspeth's old notes. A warm room should not belong to the person who paid for it. It should belong to the person who needs it. Commons, Laurel said, not house, not memorial, not Calder. Rhett agreed. Whitaker never saw the completed rooms in person. His heart weakened before spring. Rhett visited the palliative care facility several times, sometimes bringing Clem when the staff permitted it. By then, the young shepherd could rest quietly beside Whitaker's chair without pulling at the oxygen tubing or investigating the meal tray. During the last visit, Whitaker looked smaller than the blanket covering his knees. Clem placed one large paw against the old man's slipper. Whitaker smiled. He still makes decisions for people? Mostly about when breakfast should occur. Dangerous beginning. Rhett sat opposite him. For months there had been something unfinished between them, the anger over Elspeth's name, the gratitude Rhett did not want to owe, and the knowledge that Clem had entered his life through an act that was both presumptuous and kind. Whitaker reached toward the table. The missing brass button from his old coat rested there. A nurse had kept it among the belongings recovered after his admission. Beside it lay a folded piece of paper. Rhett opened the note. A door saves no one if it opens only once. That sounds like something Elspeth would write, Rhett said. Whitaker's breath came with a faint rattle. No, she would have used better punctuation. Rhett laughed. The sound surprised them both. Whitaker closed his eyes, still smiling. He died 4 days later. There was no public statue, and no attempt to erase the harm attached to his earlier choices. Elspeth Commons placed the brass button inside a small glass case beside the cooperative charter. The label beneath it read, Whitaker Sloan. He returned to repair what he helped build. A year after the night of 3 knocks, snow fell again over Larkspur Basin. Clem was no longer small enough to disappear inside a blanket. He had become a tall, athletic German shepherd with a deep black saddle shifted slightly toward his right side and warm golden fur along his legs and face. The narrow gold stripe remained between his eyes. His left ear still leaned outward, lending him a permanently attentive expression. He spent evenings near the main entrance of Elspeth Commons, not blocking it, watching it. Inside, Inez was arguing that the heating reserve needed a larger budget. Laurel stirred a pot of stew while pretending not to listen. Merrick sat beneath a lamp repairing a tabletop radio, turning the tuning knob even though the case was still open. Rhett carried a box of donated boots toward the storage room. His hair had grown longer at the collar. The old Navy trident remained visible beneath his rolled sleeve, crossed by the same pale scar. He still lived alone on Broken Fir Road, though the word alone no longer described every hour of his life. There were still difficult nights. Grief had not packed its things and left because a building opened. Sometimes Rhett sat on the floor with Clem beside him and listened to the house settle until morning. The difference was that he no longer treated those nights as proof that he had failed to heal. Morning came. He returned. 3 knocks sounded against the Commons door. Clem lifted his head. Outside stood an elderly stranger with a weathered suitcase. Snow covered the shoulders of his coat. Beside him waited an old hound with long ears, thin legs, and a rope serving as a leash. The man did not ask for money. He looked past Rhett into the warm room, then down at the dog. "Someone said you might have a bed," he said, "but I won't go anywhere that won't take Roscoe." Rhett glanced toward the occupancy board. One pet-friendly room remained open. Before he could answer, Clem rose. The German shepherd walked to the threshold, looked once at the old hound, then stepped backward into the room, not guarding the people inside from the stranger, making space. Rhett opened the door wider. "Both of you come in," he said. "No one leaves family in the snow here." The stranger's face changed, not with dramatic relief, but with the cautious disbelief of a man who had learned to distrust good news until he could feel the heat himself. Roscoe entered first. Clem touched his nose gently to the old dog's ear and walked beside him toward the animal wing. Rhett remained at the open door for another moment. Snow drifted across the porch, where Whitaker had once stood carrying a nearly frozen puppy and an unfinished confession. Behind Rhett came the sounds of bowls, voices, tools, and disagreement, the living noise of people sharing something none of them owned alone. The door no longer depended on Rhett's courage, his memory, or his willingness to answer 3 knocks in the night. There were policies now, keys held by several people, votes, night staff, emergency beds, names on schedules, a community prepared to open the door even when Rhett was not there. He stepped aside and let the cold air leave. Outside, winter continued across the valley. Inside, the door belonged to everyone. Sometimes the right thing is not rescuing someone by taking control of their life. Sometimes it is standing beside them until fear no longer makes the decision. Rhett learned that an open door is only the beginning. Real kindness listens, makes room, and allows people to keep the companions they love. In our own lives, we may not change an entire system, but we can notice who has been overlooked and help make their voice matter again. Tell us what this story meant to you in the comments and subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and quiet human grace. May God give you the wisdom to recognize those standing outside and the courage to make room.